All right, everyone, welcome back into another NFL betting video. Going to be breaking down the Washington Commanders versus the Miami Dolphins, a game that's going to be played in Madrid. It's a pretty fun game. Let's go ahead and break it down. So, yeah, not every slate is going to be created equal, and I think that this slate is one of the more appealing kind of single-game slates that we've had in quite some time. Obviously, it being an early game here in the United States, it's a game that's being played in Madrid. It's a pretty high-scoring game as well, 47.5 total points, and it's also a 2.5-point spread, so it should be a close game. For props betting purposes, this is kind of ideal because we are getting a lot of potential value just due to playing time. I don't think the boards are accurately reflecting some of the playing time that we're going to get. So we'll talk about that, but I wanted to call out, I do think Miami should be able to win this game by more than 2.5 points. And so this top bet on the kind of more traditional books bet for the game, Miami Dolphins at -3, a 7% edge on low vig. That'll be a bet that gets updated, but I did want to call that out. If you want to bet on the Dolphins to win, you could bet on rebet at -135. I like that as well. They should win. They have played better recently, especially given how banged up Washington is, and that's going to be the starting point for the bets that we're going to cover. So guys, we do know that Terry McLaurin is still out in this game, as well as Jaden Daniels. Then the receiver number kind of one from the previous week besides Debo was Treylon Burks. He ended up getting a lot of the work and getting 3 targets, had a pretty big game. He is out. And then their backup tight end, Ben Sanat, is also probably going to sit. He did not practice on Friday. I kind of think that means he's going to sit. And so this is where I think we're getting a lot of value. But this also leads me to believe that they're going to end up with a more run-heavy approach with their starting running back, which does seem to be Chris Rodriguez, guys. Chris Rodriguez ended up playing 68% of the snaps in the first half. Then Bill ended up starting in the second half. What's interesting is that Chris Rodriguez was named the team starter, and that's probably why he ended up starting. But the fact that he played 68% of the snaps in the first half, to me, was very interesting, okay? And then what happened in the second half is Chris Rodriguez ended up getting a shoulder injury, and then we saw Bill end up getting a lot more work, which I do got to bring up this tweet again, guys. The amount of hate I have gotten from people from this tweet that were trying to victory lap me after like Bill had like a 2 touchdown game was insane, for calling out that obviously him hitting a random big run in a preseason Monday Night Football game was not good for his ADP. It's just insane. But I do think it makes sense for this, assuming that Chris Rodriguez is going to start again, for it to be a Chris Rodriguez game. I do think there's a chance that he could end up scoring a touchdown. I kind of like the bet for him to score a touchdown. Him to get over his rush yards, though, is a bet that I like. But if we are betting on Chris Rodriguez, I think we could kind of have it be twofold, where we are betting on that first half usage to be there again. And so you could bet on him to, let's say, get over 49.5 rush yards, okay? Because he would get the over if you just gave him 68% of the snaps based off of a per game average against Miami. So guys, Miami gives up the 3rd most rushing yards to opposing running backs this year. Okay. And if you take their yards given up per game, about 112, Chris Rodriguez would end up with about 77 rush yards then, which again, I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't mind the idea of really you could do this both sides. If you think it's going to be a Bill game, you can. Well, we're betting the over like for Rodriguez here, but at an increased rate, so 49.5. And then you could potentially look at Chris Rodriguez for under his rush yards. Now, maybe we get news that, Bill for under his rush yards. Now, maybe we get news that Bill's going to end up starting. Then obviously we wouldn't like that. But I do got to call it this bet for Chris Rodriguez. It really doesn't make sense. We're getting him at 7.7 for his fantasy score on underdog. Okay, let's just say you give him his 37.5 rush yards and a reception and maybe a yard receiving. Like, this line is egregiously bad for his fantasy score. Again, I actually like the idea of him scoring a touchdown, but I do need to call out that this line for him is trash. Like, it is a bad line as I'm recording this video. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up hitting it, getting the over. But based off of their current lines, based off of their current data, this is a terrible line for them. Another one as well is with Malik Washington for his under fantasy score of 6.5 if we round up. He is someone that has seen limited snaps recently here for the Miami Dolphins. Last week, guys, only playing 45% of the snaps. Now, he did have a 67% route share. Okay. He is someone that they do like to give him the football in manufactured ways, so a lot of short targets. And that could end up just being an outlier in that game because prior to that, he had seen 64, 62, and 70% of the snaps. So I will admit that. And it is a matchup against Washington where they do tend to give up a decent amount of production to, well, mostly tight ends is I think where we want to attack, but they do give up production to opposing receivers. But this is like kind of a crazy line to me. He's gotten the over twice recently, 11 and then 8, but last week, guys, it was mostly due to him scoring a touchdown, and he's not going to be a high touchdown type player. And so that line, again, kind of just given the lines that we're getting from them, also seems to be just too high right now. And so those two are kind of bets that stood out to me. And then when we look at the prize based and underdog optimizers, the underdog optimizer, we are seeing that this is actually one of the better bets for this game that we are getting. And so, yes, this ends up being a spot where I think we want to get to it. So one of the tough parts about sometimes giving NFL prop betting advice is you could really nail a spot and nail a call, and it just ends up being wrong. Last week, I told you guys I really like Greg Dulcich to see his workload be increased. Thus, I like the opportunities that we were going to get for him betting-wise. Well, he did see his snaps increase, and he also saw 76% of the routes. Ended up with 4 targets in that game. Now, he only got 1 reception for 22 yards. It was a tough matchup. We knew that was kind of the tough part about the bet last week for us with Greg Dulcich. But if we see his snaps go up once again, which I do think is going to occur, then I really like the lines that we're getting for Greg Dulcich in general. If you want to bet on him to get over 23.5 receiving yards, you can do that. The standard line that's out for him right now is for his 2.5 receptions. I think that ends up being a decent spot for us to get to. This is a good matchup as well, where Washington just gives up around the 3rd most production to opposing tight ends. And so Greg Dulcich should be firmly a part of the game plan in this game. And we have seen this role be extremely valuable with Tyreek Hill out for the Dolphins. We saw it last year with Jonnu Smith just breaking out. We saw it with Darren Waller, who was playing limited snaps and going off. And then we've seen it for 2 weeks now with Greg Dulcich. Again, I know the results weren't there last week, but 4 targets, 76 routes, like it just needs to show up on paper. And so I do like him to also get over 2.5 receptions, but just in general, I like the bets that we are getting for Greg Dulcich. Now, it is worth calling out that when we pull him up on the prize picks optimizer, yes, the under fantasy score is going to be a bet that is decent, 53.2% likelihood, because he's not likely to score a touchdown. And again, his like standard line is 23.5 for his receiving yards, and he's at 2.5 receptions. So it is worth calling out. If you guys think he's going to struggle, maybe you could look to him there if you want to bet on his under. And then another player that I'm really surprised with the line that we're getting is Westbrook Ikine. So he actually ended up out snapping Malik Washington last week, guys, getting 47% of the snaps, Malik Washington 45. So not a big difference there. And this is a bet where the only reason why I kind of want to make it is simply because there's a big prop line difference. Like I wouldn't be going out of my way to bet on him, but between prize based and underdog, as I'm recording this video, it's off by 4. Underdog has it at 13.5, prize based at 17.5. I like the over actually a little bit more on underdog, but per Vegas, the average sportsbook line is at 15.5. The projection data is at 19.74. Kind of, there. This could end up being a middle. This should not be off by 4. This is an insane value for us at such a low line as well. So I did want to call that up. By the time this video gets posted, this might have already been bumped. I kind of expected to. I did call this out, though, on the 9 to 5 Discord already. And then we do need to jump into Zach Ertz. So Zach Ertz should get a lot of looks in this game, guys, especially if the backup tight end is going to end up being out. Miami is a team that you can somewhat attack via the tight end position as well. I would expect Zach Ertz to end up having a good game here. Miami does give up a decent amount of production to opposing tight ends. And so he could end up kind of just being the number 1 receiving option in this game for Washington. So I don't mind betting on him. The issue is he really hasn't had a heavy target share, but that's not a terrible bet. If you want to bet on him over 41.5 receiving yards, I wouldn't blame you. The player that I think we're getting the best value on as I'm recording this video is going to be Jaylen Lane. And that's because he should step up into really kind of the receiver number 2 in the spot. Again, Treylon Burks ended up getting injured in that last game. And so I think it's just naturally going to end up being more of Jaylen Lane in this game. Lane only ended up with 29% of the routes and 27% of the snaps, but Luke McCaffrey's out. Treylon Burks is going to be out. Terry McLaurin's out. Now, it could end up being Chris Moore. It could end up being Robbie Chosen. I just think it makes more sense to give Jaylen Lane some work, especially after he had a big catch in the last game, guys, for it was 1 reception for 41 yards. They probably are just going to want to give him more looks. And the kind of issue that I have with him is that he's probably likely to get like 2 receptions. I don't know if I necessarily want to bet him over 2 receptions. Maybe you target his longest reception. That could be a decent spot to get to. But if you're doing that, I probably would just end up on him over longest reception. but he is someone that I just think the lines are too low on him given the role that he should have. Treylon Burks ended up playing 54% of the snaps last week. So let's just say you give Lane half of those snaps, he's right at about 50% of the snaps, which would end up being enough, assuming Marcus Mariota does not end up playing poorly. Then I do want to talk about Devon Achane. I think the lines that we're getting on him are basically correct. I don't think there's much value here. If you think he's going to continue to have a good game, it is a game where they are the favorites, which should mean he ends up having a good rushing game. I don't hate that idea, but also not a spot where I think we need to get to it. And then lastly, I did want to call this bet here for Tua Tagovailoa. It's a bet where if you want to bet on him over his fantasy score, do it on Prize Picks. I actually like the under a little bit more on underdog. Just looking at this graphic, we can see the underdog line is going to be higher than all the other data points that we have coming in. And so guys, getting into the 9 to 5 bet of the day, it is kind of a simple approach, I think, for this slate. As I'm recording this video, it could end up updating here. The two simple bets, Chris Rodriguez, Malik Washington for under their fantasy scores. Again, underdog just not properly valuing those two players based off of their own projections, okay? Then I do like Jaylen Lane to end up having a good game. We are getting a little bit of a better bet on underdog at 22.5 receiving yards. Perfectly fine. Again, betting on him to get over like 23.5 as well. Greg Dulcich, I would rather bet on him to get over 2.5 receptions than maybe his receiving yards. Another tight end, I mentioned Zach Ertz. A little bit of a middle here with Tua if you guys want to get to that. And then Westbrook Akine. This is definitely a middle if you are betting on him here. I would also recommend betting on his under on Prize Picks because they're both off. It should be at 15.5, but it should never be off by 4 receiving yards. Now that's going to do it for this video, guys. I appreciate you guys being here. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you guys would like access to any of the tools that you saw throughout this video, head on over to 9to5sports.com. Get access to all those tools for a low monthly cost of $10 a month. I appreciate you guys being here. Good luck. And as always, let's keep cashing.